Telegram boy came to the door with a telegram from my father, who was a territorial, and that evening we were without a dad.
The call to defend our freedom goes out to the men of Britain and the Empire, and they answer, "We come to serve."
I was dancing in Clapson Welfare area, and this man came in with a big megaphone and he shouted, "Your king and country needs you." And these boys, a lot of them left us standing there and they jumped into army trucks, and I think they were taken to Coat Dyke Drill Hall, and before long they were all shipped to France, and a lot of them didn't come back.
Oh, I'd be 22 and I knew that if it was this war with Germany, I was going to have to go to the army one way or another.
All these little towns were denuded of their young and middle-aged men, so we lived in a world of women.
The children are evacuated from the fear of war that may be fought over our own city streets. That danger remains, and every mother who loves her children should leave them in the peace of the country.
I think being evacuated was more traumatic than the air raids themselves.
With food and clothing provided by their parents, and each carrying a gas mask, they entrain for their excitingly unknown destination.
I was evacuated to a place on the Isle of Bute.
We went out to holiday huts at Kirbeth.
A lot of the Clyde steamers arrived at the pier at Brodick with many hundreds of evacuees.
It is indeed a strange experience for these thousands of children, as well as a great responsibility for those who will be caring for them during these dark days. But we know that the women of Britain will respond to this cause as readily as the men who have taken up their duties in the defence of their country.
The evacuees came in the train, all with labels on their lapels or on their gas mask.
It was a wee village called Lochfoot, and we were assembled, and the local people who were obviously volunteered to have evacuees stay were there, and we were sort of allocated out to different places.
The so-called wise recipient mothers would look for the nice, clean, tidy ones who didn't have candles at their nose and who didn't look too lousy and had decent clothes, and they grabbed them first because they thought they're not going to be a problem.
And I remember being allocated to Mr. and Mrs. Holland, and they had a boy called Drew. I always remember I always get blamed for all his misdeeds. So it wasn't a very happy time.
So we had these little kids come up of both sexes, and Tommy, my brother, and I, we were pushed up to the attic to sleep while they took over our bedroom, which again we slightly resented.
I still remember the tension in the house. Your home was no longer your own, and people were living with you who had a completely different way of living.
We really were quite bitter about these little nyaffs coming in and taking our footballs and our model aeroplanes and our beds.
I wasn't very well accepted. I spoke differently from the other children. I dressed differently.
They were aliens as far as we were concerned. I mean, totally strange people who spoke strangely, and vice versa.
My hand would always go up. I knew the answers in school. It wasn't very popular.
They used to call me Marlene, and say, "You must be a German spy."
The evacuees were often a bit homesick too, because we would hear them crying at night.
I came to live for those times when I managed to get down to visit the children where they were evacuated. And when I saw how well and happy they looked, and how lovely and peaceful the country was, I told myself how selfish I was to want them back with me.
I missed my mother and father very, very much. My mother would come and visit me. I remember, being in tears as she walked down the road.
And a lot of them were in fact picked up, sometimes after as little as 8 to 10 weeks, and taken home, to their huge relief.
Hundreds and hundreds of commanders came onto Arran to train. They would come in and tank landing craft on the beaches.
Orkney changed so much during the war because, there was about 3 times the native population here with soldiers. There was 60,000 troops here, and there's just 20,000 roughly of us.
She liked his left. She had a good home, but she left, 'cause he was a handsome territorial. She liked his eyes right.
Winston Churchill's son, Randolph, was a senior officer, and he was going around knocking on doors, asking people to billet soldiers. There was one old lady who wouldn't take anybody in for whatever reason. And he said to her, do you know who I am? I'm Winston Churchill's son, She said, I don't care who you are, I'm not taking anybody.
I think that the first big impact that the war made on Orkney was the sinking of the Royal Oak in Scapa Flow.
It was believed that an enemy submarine was responsible for this disaster, which cost Britain so many brave lives.
The Royal Oak was a tragedy. I remember about it because everyone was so horrified that the Germans would come so near and done such a terrible thing, had drowned so many men on a big warship that was thought to be practically invincible.
Out of a total complement of 1,400, 833 died.
The sympathy of the whole nation goes out to the wives and other relatives of the men who perished in this major tragedy. Italy's dictator has taken the plunge. The young Italians who cheered the decision so wildly will have cause to regret. The Duce's years of bluffing must now be transformed into reality.
Italy declared war was a Monday. Never forget it. We were living in a room and kitchen above the shop in a tenement. My father's white apron was as white as his face. And in Italian he said to me, "Siamo in guerra." We are in war.
Immediately Mussolini declared war, police began rounding up Italians throughout the empire.
My father came from Italy, born there. My father was interned 3.5 to 4 years. My brother and I, we were British because we were born in Glasgow, Maryhill. My brother got his calling up papers from the British Army. He was taken away from me as well. Many Italians were very badly treated. A lot were really hurt and fought and cruelly dealt with. We'd never had any trouble, never thrown a stone, never. Other Italians weren't so lucky. We survived, but it wasn't easy. It wasn't easy at all.
This is the army, Mr. Jones. No private rooms or telephones.
Dig for victory was the slogan. There used to be posters up on the walls. Dig for victory.
Dig for victory. Break the wastelands, drain the bogs, plough up the parks and the golf courses. Pastures must make way for grain and pleasure parks for pasture.
My mother grew vegetables, which she'd never done before, and she also grew tomatoes. We had a little greenhouse and she grew tomatoes and cucumber.
Yes, all over the country they're digging up little plots and growing things. Not only just the ordinary civilians, the soldiers on gun emplacements and searchlights have made gardens where they grow fine crops.
I remember half the golf course being ploughed up to grow corn and tatties and so forth.
I was in the land army.
They had to find substitutes for the men drafted into the services. Once again, women filled the gaps. The Women's Land Army, drawn from every class and corner of the country.
I didn't quite know one end of a cow from the other, really, till I got there.
The Women's Land Army are helping, actively cutting and bringing in the kale.
Ploughing or sowing or tatty lifting or whatever had to be done, and women did it.
These men and women, these old people and children who are working on the land, together with the fighting services, are defending Scotland. They are striking their blow for freedom on Scotland's fighting field.
Look again at this small island. War had surged round it like a raging sea and over it like a lightning storm.
It was a Saturday afternoon. My parents were officiating at a wedding in the town, and I watched this Ju-88 Junkers aircraft, which was a fighter bomber twin engine, because we all knew them in great detail, flying in from the sea at about 100 feet, very low. He came round and saw the then Inverbondi or Banff distillery, which was just 400, 500 metres from the sea, but on the west of the town. And there were a couple of bangs as I was going on my bike, and a column of smoke and the rat-tat-tat of machine gunning. The troops were trying to fire back, and then the next thing that happened was that whisky started to run down the burn. White spirit, 120 proof or thereabouts. And the vats holding this had been ruptured. And there was one local lad was caught taking his tin hat off and scooping the white spirit off the top of the burn. And the cattle and sheep that had taken of the whiskey bar were getting merry and bright and sort of galloping around a bit. But there were quite a number of visitors the next day to the town to see the cattle. And a great deal of speculation about whether, when you got the milk from them the next day, you would be getting something like Bailey's.
I was living in Rosemount area here in Aberdeen, and we heard the air raid siren go off, and immediately we went under the stair. There was no air raid shelter at that time. It was just under the stair, which was the safest place.
In my wee gas mask, I'm working out a plan. All the kids imagine that I'm just a bogeyman. The girls all smile and bring their friends to see the nicest looking warden in the ARP.
I was an air raid warden during the war in Aberdeen. We went out in pairs. A man and a woman went out together. The man stayed on the pavement and the woman went into the shelter, see that everything was all right. So I went down with my notebook, took down how many adults, how many children. Anything happened, they knew how many had to come out. The anti-aircraft bullets were rattling along the pavement, practically at your side, but you didn't have time to think about it. You were running all the time. A bit traumatising, but we just did our job.
I got a phone call to say that the street I lived in Aberdeen had been bombed. There had been incendiaries, fire, everything. The windows in the house were all blown out. Everything was just a mess, you know.
Whole buildings completely demolished. And you could actually see a bath up in one part of the building, just where there was just a bath left sitting. It was most grotesque to look at, you know.
There was some tragic sights. Some of the people were very badly injured.
You just want to cry when you saw it. It was terrible. There's lives lost. There's ambulances there as well. There were men raking in the rubble to see if they could find any bodies. And there was quite a few people were killed.
These are German prisoners of war, their life bounded by a prison cage. There are 385,000 of them in Britain today.
I was fighting for the Germans in France. We were captured by the Americans and moved through transit camps to a camp near Alyth in Perthshire called Balhari, in the Balhari estate.
All the farms had used the labour of German and Italian prisoners of war.
We went out to farms and did agriculture work, whatever was to be done. We had a prisoner uniform with the big patches and the trousers in the back of the jacket.
We always thought when we were kids that was targets in case they had to be shot when they were escaping, but there was no place to go in Orkney.
We got some abuse from some people, but very few.
I went down there and met a number of these Germans and rather disconcertingly found that they were really just like us, which was a bit of a conflict because the propaganda during the war was intense. We were indeed brainwashed. You know, there's no good Germans, only bad Germans.
I met my girlfriend on a farm. Well, what you call fraternising, wasn't it, at that time? Well, it wasn't allowed, of course. I took my girlfriend to the pictures in Blairgowrie. And one of the guards, unfortunately, was at the pictures as well. And he noticed me. I was charged and got 10 days detention for being a naughty boy, for going over the fence. I was still a prisoner when I got married. On the 6th of March, 1948, I got permission from the commandant. My wife, she come from Blairgowrie, but the people accepted it in Blairgowrie. They did.
You wouldn't like to be caught bending, nor does your ration book. Keep it clean, in an envelope, don't fold it. See?
It was share and share alike. Rationing and price control worked well. Poor families fared better in war than they had done in peace. The family ration was trimmed pretty close.
You paid for the food in the ordinary way, but you had to have the ration coupons before they would sell it to you.
Rationing didn't make too much of an impact on a young child because, you know, the parents always managed to, especially your mother, managed to work miracles with the food that was available.
If something came into the shops, it went round like wildfire and everybody rushed with their ration books to some special offer. And if you saw something in the shop while you were in, you would come back and tell your mother, but you didn't tell anybody else in case it would get done before you got there.
Luxuries weren't to be had, nor necessities, except by permits and quotas and rationing. Anything and everything.
When I was at secondary school, you knew if a boy fancied you because he would give you some of his sweetie coupons.
Horse meat is rapidly becoming part of Britain's diet. 3 million people buy it every week, though less than half that number know it.
What they called offal, wasn't it, rationed? That was like hearts and cheeks and tongues.
In the winter time, we would go ferreting and get rabbits, and that would supplement the diet considerably.
Every time one of your sows had piglets, someone from the Ministry of something or other used to come along to count the piglets. But we somehow managed always to hide a piglet, so when it grew up we had an extra pig.
Stewed rabbit with nice gravy and mashed turnip and golden wonder. Absolutely delectable.
Eggs have come to you every 4 weeks now. Beat that. Not you, Mama. Sit down.
We always had soldiers who came to us, and they always wanted either cheese or a hen or butter or eggs or something to take away with them to their families.
I would go to this farmhouse and get maybe half a dozen eggs, which I had to sort of be careful taking home in case a bobby who was prowling about on his bicycle would spot me.
One of the lads came to school with a banana once. A banana. We actually got bits off the skin just to eat, just to see the taste, to get the taste again.
And this shows you what 6 years without a banana has done to this young man. He's forgotten how to tackle the darn thing.
And I remember him having to go to hospital. I'd broken a leg, and there was a man in the same room. He'd broken his because he'd slipped in the banana skin, and everybody was laughing because they'd only just come back into the shops.
The fate of war brought us together. We, the Scots, and you, the Poles.
Kelso was really busy. We had about 1,000 Polish troops in Kelso.
We had heard of you. Although you had been driven from your own country, then from France, we knew that you were determined to fight on. We were curious to see for ourselves what sort of men you were. So we watched you march to your destination and were reassured when we saw that you came to our country not as refugees, but as a fully armed fighting unit.
They were rehabilitated in houses and in all the public halls around Kelso. There was tanks in the local park. We had a tank regiment there, and it was churned up. It was about a couple of feet deep in mud. And the tanks used to come through the town, and there would be sparks flying off the cobbles with their big metal treads, and they knocked the odd lamppost and the odd garden wall down. But it was all taken in good part. You know, they had to be there. They were training.
Our eyes were upon you, the first strangers to come here for generations.
We had Polish officers, many of whom married local girls. And of course they were aristocrats, a lot of them, and beautifully presented, so smart. And they oiled their hair, and they had perfume and aftershave, and they clicked their heels and kissed the ladies' hands. The poor fishermen didn't get a look in. No, it was a sad time for the fishermen.
More than half of our civilian casualties were women and children. Sleeping and waking, the nightmare of sudden death beset the British people. Bombed out, called up, decimated, rationed, blitzed, rocketed, fly-bombed. We never slackened. We found in common danger a comradeship and a common will to fight, to win.
My mother could hear like a wave of planes and another wave, and she thought, they're heading for Glasgow, where her husband and her parents and everybody she knew were.
I remember going out one night to watch them. It was moonlight, and you could see the swastikas even in these planes that were flying so low, you know. And what they did was they followed all the locks up and got to Clydebank.
We called them whistling bones. That's the noise they made anyway. And then you would hear the explosion.
Crump. And you waited, you thought this is coming right onto your shelter.
There were searchlights, barrage balloons, bombs going off, you name it. And I wasn't frightened. I was fascinated.
Night and day and night, indiscriminate attacks continue. In underground shelters, a dauntless Britain carries on undismayed.
And the shelter was lit, incidentally, by candles, and the people already in there were sitting and wrapped in blankets.
You just sat in the entrance close, and sitting there in a wee corner. Everybody all just huddled together. And I was inside my father's big heavy coat, and cuddling him, and he closed the coat round me.
We never ever used the shelters during an air raid. We always stayed in the hall, and everyone sat in the hall, including my gran, who was an invalid.
Let every honour be given to the rescue parties, nurses and doctors, who toil for hours among the wreckage, bringing help and easing the suffering of survivors. From out the bowels of devastation, they bring the injured to be ministered to by these gallant brothers and sisters of mercy.
I joined the ambulance service. Went down to Clydebank. A bomb had dropped on a building, and there was a girl had gone thinking it was a parachutist coming down, and it was a landmine, and we had to pick her up. Her face was absolutely covered in glass, almost jewelled. Her face was absolutely incredible. Even her eyelids had glass.
There was a glass panel in the door, and it came in, and I must have looked up, and that's when I got the eye injury. Funny enough, there was a big SMT bus, and we all were piled into it, and we're all taken to the Western Infirmary. And that's where I had the operation for the eye. I had to have the eye removed. It was totally poisoned. Half the building was down, it was just total rubble, and the other half was up, but blasted.
The street was covered with debris, bricks, planks, cement, twisted piece of metal. And scattered among the metal, I distinctly saw body parts, blackened, charred, red, still with bits of uniform attached to them.
Everything that was saved was in a school case of mine. That was all we had, this tiny case and what we stood in.
In the morning then, you would get all these people streaming out the Drimmen Road, coming from Clydebank. Refugees pushing prams and barrows and carrying suitcases with all they had.
Something that stuck in my mind because they didn't speak. They were silent, and they all looked like zombies straight ahead of them, passing, just walking on.
I hadn't had leave for quite some time. I thought I should go home and I'll just surprise everybody with just walking in on them. On my road up, I happened to pass a butcher's shop. The window was out, and I knew the man who was in charge of it. Oh, he says, I don't think you should go up there. He says, the place is destroyed. He says, and as far as I know, your whole family's been wiped out. When I got to the church hall where this information place was, the lady looked up her records and she said, your mother's been killed, your 2 brothers have been killed, and your sister's been killed. In those days, nobody got counselling. They just had to get on with it the best way they could.
This was the British people's finest day. The day, the end of the German war. Throughout the country, at homes and at work, a nation exploded with spontaneous rejoicing for a great and wonderful deliverance.
It was celebration time. There were parties, VE parties here, there and everywhere, Union Jacks flying around, you know.
I went down to the Castle Gate in Aberdeen, where we had the celebrations. And we were hugging each other and kissing each other and that sort of thing.
Oh, there was a lot of dancing and singing in the streets and a lot of hilarity.
We suddenly heard the music outside, my sister and we got out of bed and got our clothes on and went and joined them and went round the village with an accordion, and that was the end of the war.
People look back now on the war as all pulling together and everybody kind, and I'm not convinced that it was like that.
Nothing positive can come out of war. Nothing positive.
The homecoming of a British soldier. This is the kind of news for which every woman waits.
It's a lovely day tomorrow.
I hadn't seen my hubby for 3 years nearly. I had a daughter by that time. She was nearly 2.5. He'd never even seen her.
It's the end of separation, the beginning of that ecstatic reunion of husband and wife still very much in love.
It was strange in a way because my father had only been home on leaves, you know, throughout the war. And suddenly you had a father.
I didn't see my father at all for 3 whole years. He came back, a hero to us, but within a month or 2, he was a monster because he disrupted the whole household.
To send any mother's son to war is a scandal, and that's both the enemy's side, because I think war's obscene.
We could hardly imagine what it would be like not to have a blackout, not to be bombed, not to be machine gunned, not to have lists of deaths and wounded and missing, which was worst of all, up in the townhouse each day. We only had a kind of fantasy about what peace would be like, but we knew it was a good thing.
It was just a great rejoicing. The lights went on again. And we started to go forward from there. That's, you know, everybody started to hopefully get work and become prosperous again and look forward to the future.